Stay until the storm passes, the human said, and thought he was offering nothing at all. The orc captain looked at him for a long moment across the drowned light of his doorway. Water ran off her in sheets and pooled on his floor. Her hair was flat to her skull, her coat was gone, and she was holding herself upright with one hand braced against the frame because her legs had stopped being reliable somewhere out on the rocks. She answered him in a voice like a heavy cable dragged over stone. "Then I stay forever." Thomas Vale did not understand what he had just done. He thought he had offered a stranger a fire and a dry floor until the weather turned. He did not know that among her people a shelter offered without conditions was not a kindness. It was an oath, and that she had just answered it in kind, in front of the only witness her people ever required, which was the sea. 6 hours earlier, she had been standing on the deck of a warship with 40 names knotted into the cord at her belt, and every single one of them was still breathing. Now the iron tide was coming apart on the reef below Cordrek Rock, and Thomas was out in the black hauling on a net line, in water cold enough to stop a heart in 4 minutes, and what came up out of that water was not fish. It was a woman who outweighed him by half, barely conscious, one hand still closed tight around a length of rope that had not torn. It had been cut. He did not notice that. Not then. He had a stranger to keep breathing, and questions could wait for the fire. If you are new here, welcome to Orc Story, where two worlds that were never meant to touch find each other anyway, and where love is built out of small, stubborn kindnesses. Take one moment to subscribe and tap the like button before we begin, so the next tale finds its way straight to you. She had commanded a fleet, buried her mother at sea, and never once in 33 years been carried by anybody. It was a half-broken lamp-keeper with a bad shoulder who would frighten her most. The storm had come up out of the southwest 3 hours before dark, and Thomas Vale had done what he always did, which was climb the 91 steps to the lamp room and trim the wick and set the light burning before the weather had properly made up its mind. Cordrek Rock was 6 miles off the mainland, a grey shoulder of stone with a lighthouse on its high end and 3 cottages on its low end, 2 of them empty for years now, their windows boarded from the inside. The island was a 1/4 mile long. A man could walk the whole of it in the time it took a kettle to boil. There were no trees. There was one path, worn pale by one pair of boots, going up and down it twice a day for 4 years. The reef lay a half-mile south, and it did not show at high water, and that was the entire reason the lighthouse existed. He was down at the boat slip when the iron tide struck it. He heard it before he saw anything. A long, low, tearing sound that came across the water and went straight through the soles of his boots, and then a second sound after it that was worse, because it was not a sound wood makes. It was the sound wood makes when it stops being a boat. Thomas ran. He had a net line rigged along the eastern shelf, the way he always did in a blow, 100 fathoms of good rope pegged into the rock with an iron ring, because the eastern shelf was where the sea put things. Driftwood, barrels, once a door. The sea had a habit on this island of carrying whatever it had taken and setting it down in that one place, patiently, like a dog bringing back a stick nobody had thrown. He got to the shelf, and the spray was going over his head, and the water in the channel was moving in a way that had nothing to do with waves. It was simply going somewhere, fast, in the dark. He saw a lantern out on the water, and then he did not see it. He got the line in his hands. What he was doing was not brave in any way he would have recognized. He did not think about it. He had thought about it exactly once, 17 years ago, and had come to a conclusion and had not needed to revisit the matter since. Something struck the line hard enough to burn his palms. He hauled. The rope came in 1 foot at a time and then stopped coming, and he set his boots against the rock and put his whole thin weight backward against it and hauled it again, And out in the black, something rolled, and the weight changed, and he nearly went over sideways into the channel. He got 4 more feet. Then a hand came up out of the water onto the shelf. It was enormous. It closed on the wet stone, and it did not slip, and Thomas dropped the line and got both of his own hands around that forearm and pulled with everything 6 years of hauling nets and 4 years of climbing 91 steps twice a day had put into his arms. She came out of the sea like something the island had decided to keep. She was taller than him lying down than most men were standing, and she was not moving well, and her free hand was still closed tight around a length of rope. He tried to take it from her, and her fingers would not open. So he left it. He got her under the arms and dragged her up the shelf 10 feet, then rested, then 10 more. The rain came down flat and cold. Somewhere out past the reef there was still noise and lights, and then after a while there was less noise and fewer lights. He could not go back out. He knew it while he was thinking about going back out. The channel was running 4 knots, and the light was gone, and he was one man with one small boat and a bad left shoulder that had never set right. And if he took the boat out into that, he would simply be one more thing the sea had taken from this island, and there would be nobody left to light the lamp at all. He stood there in the rain with the water running off his chin and made himself understand it. Then he bent down and got his arms under a stranger who outweighed him by half and started up the path. It took him 35 minutes to cover 400 yards. He fell twice. The second time he stayed down on one knee longer than he meant to, and above him on the high end of the island the lamp went around and around and around, throwing its long white arm out over the water every 12 seconds, steady, patient, saying the same thing it always said to anyone still out there. Here is the rock. Here is where the rock ends. Nobody answered it. He got her through his door at something past 10 o'clock and laid her on the floor beside the hearth because he could not lift her onto the bed, and he built the fire up until the room went orange, and only then, kneeling, with his own hands shaking so badly he had to press them flat against his knees to stop them, did he look properly at what he had brought in out of the sea. She was an orc. He had seen orcs before, at a distance, on the mainland docks. Everyone had. Their ships came down the northern coast twice a year and traded saltfish and iron and rope and went away again, and the harbourmen said things about them in the taverns, and the orcs said nothing at all about the harbourmen. And that was the whole of the relationship between Thomas Vale's people and hers. He had never been in a room with one. Her skin was a deep green, dark as river stone in shadow, and there was a long, ridged scar across the back of her right hand that had been made by something serrated. Her hair was black and had been braided close to the skull in 6 tight rows, and 3 of the rows had come apart. There was a heavy ring on her left thumb, iron, worn smooth. Her coat was gone, and her shirt was a coarse grey wool, and it had been good once, and she was still holding that rope. He got a blanket over her. He got the kettle on. He worked her boots off and put a folded coat under her head, and at some point in all of this her eyes opened, and they were pale amber and entirely unfocused, and she looked at the ceiling of his cottage for 4 or 5 seconds. Then she said one word, low, in a language he did not know, and then she said in his own tongue quite clearly 6. And her eyes closed again. Thomas sat back on his heels. He did not know what 6 meant. He would not know for another day and a half. But he had spent 4 years in a house where nobody said anything at all, and he found that the word had gone into him and lodged somewhere, the way a splinter does. He fed the fire. He hung her wet shirt on the line above the hearth, and near midnight, when he finally worked the rope out of her slackening fingers to coil it properly, he held the end of it up to the lamp without much interest, the way any fisherman would. Rope frays when it parts. It goes ragged, and the strands pull long, and you can read the failure in it like a sentence. This rope had a clean, flat end. He turned it over once, frowning slightly, and pushed it into his belt without knowing why, and thought no more about it that night. There was a stranger on his floor who might not see morning, and questions could wait for the fire. She woke at some point before dawn and did not move at all. This was training. A soldier wakes and does not announce it, and learns the room first, and Veka of the Iron Tide had been doing it since she was 19 years old. She lay on her side on a plank floor in front of a low fire, wrapped in 2 blankets that had been folded around her by hands that had taken the trouble to tuck the edges under. And she let her eyes go around the room, and the room told her everything the man in it was never going to say out loud. It was one long room with a stone hearth at one end and a bed at the other. It was poor. The rug had been mended in 4 places with wool that did not match, but the floor was swept and the mending was neat, and the herbs hanging from the beam had been tied off carefully. And whoever lived here had never once let the place go, which told her something in itself. There was 1 chair pulled up to the table and a 2nd chair against the wall with a coil of net line stacked on the seat, which meant nobody had sat in it for a long time. There were 2 cups on the shelf. One of them was clean. The other one had a film of dust in the bottom, and it had been left on the shelf anyway, and not thrown out, and not used. There was a low shelf by the bed with 9 or 10 pieces of sea glass on it, arranged in a line by size, green and white and 1 rare deep blue, the way a child arranges things. There was a small boat, half-made, sitting on the end of the table. Not a toy, a proper model, ribbed and planked, the sort of thing a boatwright makes to show a customer what he intends to build. The hull was finished. It had never been decked. There was a hand plane sitting beside it with a fine grey bloom of rust along its blade, which meant it had been set down and picked up again for a while, and then set down and not picked up at all. And on the doorframe, at about the height of her own hip, there were marks cut into the wood, small horizontal lines with dates beside them. She counted 7 of them going up the frame, each a little higher than the last. The 7th one had a date beside it, and then there were no more. Veka lay very still and read all of it, in the way a captain reads weather off a horizon, and understood before the man had told her a single word of it that he had not always been alone in this house, that there had been 3 cups once, or 4, that whatever had emptied the 2nd chair had happened all at once and not slowly, and that he had gone on sweeping the floor and tying the herbs and lighting the lamp every night for a stranger's ship anyway for years, which was either the strongest thing she had ever seen or the saddest, and she did not yet know which. Then she moved, and every part of her reported at once, and she found out how bad it was. Her left side had taken something. Her legs worked but slowly, and her belt was empty. She got upright against the wall in 3 separate efforts, breathing hard through her nose, and her hand went to her waist and found nothing there, and for the first time since the deck had gone out from under her, something close to panic went through Veka of the Iron Tide. The door opened. Thomas came in backward, carrying a bucket wet through again, and turned around and found a 240-pound orc captain on her feet in his house, with her back to the wall and her weight on her good side. And he stopped dead in the doorway with the bucket still in his hand. Neither of them said anything for a moment. "You should be lying down," he said. "Where is my cord?" Her voice came out worse than she meant it to, dragged and cracked from the salt water, and it filled the small room. Thomas set the bucket down. "Your rope?" "Not rope." She got one word out at a time. "A cord. Leather. Knotted. It was on my belt." He crossed to the table and picked something up off it and held it out to her at arm's length, and she took it and turned it over in her hands. It was a length of black leather about as long as her forearm, and it had been cut through, and the knots were gone. There were 4 left on the short piece he had found tangled in her shirt. There were 40. Veka stood holding it and did not move. Thomas Vale did not know what he was looking at. He knew only that a woman who had climbed out of a wrecked ship and dragged herself half a mile through winter water without making one sound of complaint had gone completely still over a piece of cut leather. And he understood, in the plain way he understood weather, that he was standing in front of something private. So he did the only thing he knew how to do. He turned away and put the kettle over the fire. After a long moment she said, "How many? How many?" Off the ship. She was still looking at the cord. "How many came ashore?" Thomas set the kettle straight and did not turn around for a second because he did not want to say it to her face. "One," he said. He heard her sit down. Not fall. Sit deliberately on the floor, with her back against the wall. The way a person sits when standing has become a thing they can no longer justify. He made the tea. He put a cup down on the boards beside her hand and went and sat in his own chair on the other side of the room, far enough away that she could ignore him if she wanted to, and he did not say any of the 6 or 7 useless things he could feel lining up behind his teeth. They stayed like that for a long while. The fire ticked. Outside, the wind came around the corner of the house in long gusts, and the rain went across the window in sheets. 6, she said eventually. He looked up. "I put 6 into the boat," she said. "I counted them in myself." 6 went over the side before she came off the reef. She turned her head and looked at him for the first time properly, and her eyes were pale amber and completely dry. "So they are somewhere. 6 of my people are in that boat. The current runs east," Thomas said carefully. "There are 3 islands east of here before the mainland. If they got clear of the reef, they had a chance. You are guessing. I've lived on this rock for 4 years and fished this water for 6 before that." He met her eyes. "I'm not guessing." She studied him. Then she gave one short nod and drank the tea, all of it, in 3 swallows, and set the cup down and asked him flatly what he wanted. Thomas blinked. "Sorry. For this." Her hand moved slightly, taking in the fire, the blankets, the cup. "You went into that water. You do not know me. My people and yours do not do this for one another." She said it without any bitterness at all, as a fact, the way she might have reported a depth sound. "So, what is it you want?" And Thomas Weil, who had not had a conversation with another living soul in 11 days, and who was tired to his bones, and whose hands were still raw from the net line, said the first thing that came into his head. "I want you to stop dripping on my floor," he said. "It's the only floor I've got." Vecca looked at him for a long moment. Nobody had answered her plainly in 9 years. People answered her carefully. People answered her the way you answer weather that might turn. She did not laugh, but something behind her eyes shifted a hand's width, the way a locked door shifts when it hears a key it was not expecting, and she leaned her head back against the wall and closed her eyes. "Then I will stop dripping on your floor," she said, and that was the beginning of it. He gave her the bed that night and slept in the chair, and when she told him flatly in the morning that this was foolish, that she was the larger animal and better built for a floor, he said that she was hurt and he was not, as though that closed the matter entirely. It did not close the matter. It opened a different one, which was that Vecca could not make the shape of him fit inside anything she had been taught. Her people counted worth in strength spent and strength shown. A man who poured his out quietly on a stranger and then made no claim on it afterward was, to her, very nearly a door with no latch. She kept waiting for the price. She waited 3 days for it. It did not come, and its not coming unsettled her more than any demand would have. On the second morning she asked him about the boat on the table. He was at the hearth with his back to her, and he did not turn around, and for a moment she thought he had not heard. "That's a hull model," he said. "You make one before you build the real thing, so the man paying can see what he's getting. You are a boatwright. I was. And now you are a lamp keeper. Now I'm a lamp keeper." She let it sit. She had commanded men for 9 years, and she knew exactly how much silence a person needs before they will step into it on their own. And she had learned that the amount is almost always less than you think. Thomas set the pot down and wiped his hands on his coat and stood looking at the fire. "My father built boats," he said, "down on the mainland, at Ellet Bay, small ones, working boats, nothing you'd look at twice." He was quiet for a second. "He used to say that a boat is the only thing a man builds that has to be right on the first day and every day after, because the sea doesn't grade on effort." "That is a true thing," Vecca said. "He was a hard man about it. He'd make me take a whole strake off and cut it again if it was a 1/4 inch out." Thomas shook his head slightly. "I hated him for it until I was about 22. Then I understood him and I loved him for it. And then he died, which is generally the order these things happen in." Vecca made a low sound of agreement. I married a girl called Maren, he said, and there it was. And he had not planned to say it, and now it was out in the room and he had to go on. She had a laugh you could hear across a boatyard. Her father hated me. He came round eventually. He almost smiled. We had a boy. When? He'd have been 13 this spring. Vecca did not say anything. She had learned young that people telling you the worst thing that ever happened to them do not want to be interrupted, because they have got themselves up to a speed, and if you stop them they may not manage it again. The lamp keeper's post came open out here when Wen was 5, Thomas said. It was steady money. Boats were going bad on the mainland. Everyone was buying from the yards up north, and I had a family. So we took it. Maren said she'd give it 2 winters and then we'd see. He looked at the window. She gave it 4. She liked it more than she expected to. She used to say the island had exactly the right number of people on it. He stopped for a while. There was a storm 4 years ago in the back end of February, he said. It wasn't the worst one I'd seen. That's the part I can never get anybody to understand. It wasn't even the worst one that winter. He picked up a splinter of kindling and turned it over in his fingers. The lamp had a fault in the feed. I knew about it. I'd written to the board twice about the part, and they'd written back twice saying it was ordered. I'd been nursing it alone for 6 weeks, and I could do it in my sleep by then. It just wanted to watch, and I watched it. But not that night, Vecca said quietly. Wen had a fever, Thomas said. The fire ticked. He'd had it 3 days and it had gone up, and Maren was frightened, and I came down from the lamp room at about 9 o'clock to see him, and I sat with him a while, and the wind was going, and I thought, an hour. He's my son. I can give him an hour, and the light went out. It didn't go out. That's the thing. His voice was flat and careful. It went down. It ran low and dirty, and it lost about 1/3 of its reach, and from the mainland it would still have looked like it was burning. From out on the water it was a candle in a fog. Vecca closed her eyes. There was a coaster called the Alma Bright, Thomas said. 16 aboard. Cargo of coal and barrel staves out of Ellet Bay for the northern ports. They came down past this rock at about 11:30, and they had the light, and then they didn't have enough of it, and they put her on the reef about where your ship went on. He set the kindling down on the hearth very precisely. Maren went out with me, he said. I want to be clear about that, because there's a version of this that gets told in the taverns where I sent her, and I didn't send her. She was in her coat before I had my boots on. She was that sort. There were people in the water, and she wasn't going to stand in a doorway. And the boy? Wen was in his bed with a fever of 104, and he could hear people out on the rocks, Thomas said. So he got up, and he followed us. 9 years old. He got down as far as the eastern shelf in his nightshirt in February. He did not say the rest of it. He did not have to. We got 11 of the 16 off the Alma Bright, he said. 11. The board sent a letter about it. There's a piece of paper in that drawer that says I performed my duties with credit. He laughed once, and there was nothing in it at all. 11 men went home to their families because I was in that water, and I have never once been able to make that weigh anything against the other side of it. Not once in 4 years. I've tried. It won't go on the scale. Vecca opened her eyes. They're both up on the high end, Thomas said. Past the lamp house. There's a wall there that keeps the wind off. He straightened up and rubbed his palms on his coat, the way a man does when he has decided the conversation is finished. So that's the second chair. That's what you were looking at yesterday morning. You had it worked out in about 4 minutes, and you've been too polite to ask, which I didn't expect from an orc, if I'm honest. We are not polite, Vecca said. We are patient. It looks similar from outside. That surprised a short breath of something out of him that was nearly a laugh. Then she said, Why do you still light it? Thomas turned. You are one man on a rock, she said. The board that sends the letters is a long way away. There is nobody here to see whether you climb those stairs. I have watched you go up twice a day for 2 days with a bad shoulder, and I have watched you come down, and there is nothing in this house that you get for it. She looked at him steadily. So why? And Thomas Vale stood in the middle of his own kitchen and found that he did not have a safe answer. Because it was out once, he said. That was all. He put his coat on and went up the 91 steps and stayed up there longer than the work required, and Veka sat by the fire with a mended blanket over her legs and looked at 7 marks cut into a door frame, and thought about a man who had been paying the same debt every 12 seconds, all night, every night, for 4 years, to nobody. She told him her own story on the 4th night, and she told it badly because she had never told it at all. It came out because of the cord. She had taken to keeping it in her hand, the way a person worries about a coin, and he had noticed and had not asked, and on the 4th night she noticed him not asking, and something in her gave way. "You want to know what this is," she said. "I want to know if it's the reason you've eaten about 1/3 of what I've put in front of you," Tomas said. "But that's my business, not yours." Veka laid the cut leather on the table between them. "Every captain in the northern clans carries one," she said. "It is not a decoration. When you are given a ship, you are given the cord, and you tie into it 1 knot for every soul on your deck. Not a mark, a knot. You tie it yourself, and you learn it by touch, so that in the dark, in weather, you can put your hand on your belt and count your people without a lantern." She spread her fingers over it. "There is a particular knot for each rank and each trade. A helmsman is not tied the same as a cook. When somebody joins your deck, you tie them in. When they leave you, untie them, and you do it in front of them, and it is a good day. And when you lose one, her thumb moved along the leather, you do not untie it. You cut it out, and you keep the cut end in your hand for the whole of the burial, and then you tie the cord back together across the gap, and the join stays there for the life of the cord, so that anyone who reads it can see exactly how many you did not bring home." Thomas looked at the 4 knots left on the short piece. "How many were on it?" 40, Veka said. 40 souls. Iron-Tide is a heavy water hull. She carries 34 working and 6 under training." She paused. "She carries nothing now. And you're saying 6 got clear. I am saying 6 went into a boat." Her jaw set. "That is not the same sentence, and I will not let you make it be, however kindly you mean it." Thomas accepted that without argument because she was right. "I was made captain at 24, she said. "That is very young. There were 4 others in line ahead of me, and every one of them was better liked. My mother had been a captain, and her mother, and there is a way that works against you as much as for you, because every hard order you give is remembered as an inheritance instead of a judgment. Your mother's still living. My mother went over the side of her own deck in the following sea when I was 19, Veka said. I was aboard. I was the one who cut her knot out of my grandmother's cord, because my grandmother's hands were not steady enough by then. That is the first time I ever did it." She turned the leather over. "It is not the last." Thomas said nothing, which was the correct thing. "I have cut 11 knots in 9 years, she said. 11, across 9 years, on a warship in the northern water. Do you know what that number is? I don't. It is the lowest of any captain in the fleet," Veka said, and there was no pride in it whatsoever, only a kind of exhausted arithmetic. "The lowest. They put it in the ledger at the winter meet. Captains came to me to ask how it was done." She looked up. "And now I have cut 34 in one night, and I did not cut them, because I do not have the cord, because it was taken off my belt by the sea before I could do the one thing that is actually mine to do." Her voice did not rise. It got quieter and flatter, and that was worse. "They are not tied out," she said. "They are not tied out, and they are not tied in. They are nowhere. And there is a thing my people believe about that which I am not going to say aloud in a human house." The fire went down a little. "What happened to your ship?" Thomas said. "Whether that's not what I asked." Veka's head came up. "I've been on the water most of my life," Thomas said evenly. "Not your kind of water, I'll grant you. But I know what a ship does on a reef, and I know what one does in weather, and I've been listening to you for 4 days, and you have not once said the storm did it. You keep saying she came off the reef. Those are different accidents." For a long moment, Veka of the Iron-Tide looked at a thin human lamp-keeper across a scrubbed table and reassessed him entirely. "We had a line out," she said at last. "When she struck, we ran a heavy line from the bow to the rock to hold her head up while we got the boats away. That line was made fast by my own hands. It was 2-inch cable laid, new that season, and it was rated to hold 4 times what was on it. And it let go, she said. At the worst possible moment, in the worst possible minute, and when it let go, she came off the rock's stern, first with 34 people still on her deck. She was gripping the edge of the table now without appearing to know it. I have sailed for 22 years. I have never in my life seen a new cable-laid line fail under load. Thomas Vale sat very still, then he reached down slowly to his belt and pulled out a length of rope with a clean flat end that he had coiled and put away 4 nights ago without knowing why, and set it on the table between them. "Is that it?" he said, and Vecca looked at it and did not touch it, and the whole room seemed to get colder than the fire could account for. She did not touch it that night. She looked at it for a long time, and then she said, in a voice that had gone very carefully level, that she was tired, and she went and lay down with her face to the wall. Thomas coiled the rope and put it on the shelf beside the sea glass and let her have it. He understood the shape of what he had just handed her, or thought he did. He did not understand it fully. He would not for another week. But he had lived 4 years inside a single sentence about one night, and he knew what it did to a person to be told that the night had been something other than what they had spent every hour since believing. 22 miles south, on the mainland, in a stone office above the customs shed at Ellet Bay, a lamp was still burning at 1 in the morning. Harbour Master Osric Fenn did not keep late hours out of devotion. He kept them because the tide books had to be balanced against the anchorage returns, and because he had discovered, over 30 years, that most of a man's advantage in this world came from being the person who had read the paperwork. He was 52. He was neither large nor loud. He had thinning grey hair and a black coat brushed every morning by a woman he paid 4 pennies a week to brush it, and grey eyes with a flat, settled quality. The quality of a man who had decided a long time ago how the world worked and had simply been collecting confirmations ever since. The boy from the signal station knocked at 1:10. "Wreck off the Cordwreck Reef, sir." 2 nights back. Big hull, they think. Northern build. Fenn did not look up immediately. He finished the line he was writing, blotted it, and set the pen in the tray. "Northern build," he repeated. "Orc, sir. That's what the Ellet men are saying. There's a spar wreck coming up on the east strands with Orc rope on it. Survivors? Nobody knows, sir." Fenn opened the lower drawer of his desk and took out a bound volume, and turned to a page he did not need to look up, because he had looked it up before and remembered it. "Sit down," he said. "You may as well learn something." The boy sat. "The Coastal Salvage Act," Fenn said, "is a very old piece of law, and like most old law it was written by men who wanted a thing and worked backward to the reasoning." He turned the volume around. "A vessel wrecked within 3 miles of a licensed anchorage becomes salvage of that anchorage. Hull, cargo, gear. That is uncontroversial. Everybody understands it. It is why the Ellet men are already out there in the dark with hooks." "Yes, sir. Now." Fenn moved his finger down the page. Section 9. Where a wrecked vessel is of foreign registry and carries persons not subject to the Crown's protection, the salver may recover from those persons the reasonable costs of their rescue, maintenance, and repatriation, and where such costs cannot be met in coin, may recover them in labour, such labour to be bonded and its term fixed by the harbour court. The boy frowned. "Meaning what, sir?" "Meaning," Fenn said, "that if a foreign crew comes ashore off a wreck in this anchorage and cannot pay for the blanket you put over them, they work until they have. That's—" Fenn looked at him. The boy did not finish the sentence, and afterward could not have said why, except that the harbour master had not raised his voice or changed his expression, and that this had been somehow more effective than if he had. "You are about to say that it is cruel," Fenn said. "It is not. Cruelty requires appetite, and I have none. It is arithmetic. The Crown does not reimburse this port 1 penny for feeding foreigners. The men of Ellet Bay went into that water in February at their own risk. The law says that risk has a price and names who pays it. There is nothing that I need to be ashamed of, and nothing in it I need to enjoy." He closed the book. "Northern Hull," he said thoughtfully. Iron tide, at a guess. She's been through this anchorage twice. Heavy water hull, 40 aboard. He was quiet for a moment. 40 bonded northern labourers would be worth something considerable to the yards at Ellet, considerably more than the salvage on the hull, which is on a reef and will be matchwood by the equinox. There's the lamp keeper out there, sir. On the rock, Vale, Fenn said. Yes, sir. If there's survivors, he'll have them. Fenn picked his pen back up. Then send Doran and 2 men out when the weather drops, he said, politely. Vale is not a difficulty. He is a man who lost his family in a storm and has been punishing himself for it ever since in front of an audience of nobody, and men like that are easily managed because they have already decided what they deserve. He dipped the pen. Ask him what he's got. He won't lie. He has no practice at it. He wrote 3 more lines and then added, without any particular emphasis, and find out whether any of them came ashore anywhere else. 6 or 8 can be lost. 40 is a number people ask about. On the island, on the 6th morning, Vecca laughed for the first time in 9 years, and it was over a bird. The weather had dropped enough for Thomas to work the shallow line off the eastern shelf, and he had come back with 4 decent pollock and a small ling, and he was gutting them on the flat stone outside the door with the sleeves of his shirt rolled up. Vecca was sitting on the step. She had been permitted, after considerable negotiation, to sit on the step. She was not permitted to carry anything, walk the path, or, as she put it, breathe with enthusiasm, and she had informed him twice that morning that she had been shot in the shoulder at 26, and had stood a full watch the same night. That was your shoulder, Thomas said, not looking up. This is your ribs, your hip, and about 9 feet of you that went across a reef. Sit down. You are a very small man to be giving orders. I'm a very small man with the only boat. He said, sit down. She sat down, mostly because it hurt to keep standing, and she did not intend to say so. The gulls of Cordrek Rock were by any reasonable measure criminals. They had watched one man clean fish on that same stone for 4 years, and had built an entire civilization around it. There was one in particular, enormous, grey, with a bad foot and an expression of complete moral emptiness, that Thomas had been at war with since his 2nd winter. It came in low and from behind, off the roofline, silent as falling snow, and took the long clean off the stone. Thomas said something extremely rude, went after it, got one hand on the tail, lost the tail, slipped on fish scale, and sat down hard in the wet grass with a gull the size of a farm dog beating him about the head with its wings before it made off over the wall with 60% of the family's supper. There was a pause. Then Vecca of the Iron Tide, captain of a fleet warship, who had cut 11 knots in 9 years and buried her mother at sea and had not made a single unguarded sound in front of another living creature since she was 24, laughed. It came out of her rough and startled, and far too loud, and she put the back of her hand to her mouth immediately, the way a person does when they think they might catch it, and put it back. Thomas sat in the wet grass with a fish-tail in his hand and looked up at her. He had been thinking of her for 6 days as a problem, a responsibility, a very large injured stranger with a great deal of grief in her that he was not equipped to handle. He stopped thinking of her that way at approximately that moment, and it caught him entirely off guard, and he grinned up at her before he had decided to. That bird, he said, has taken more from me than the sea has. You are a poor hunter. I'm a fisherman. It's a completely different profession, and I'll thank you for respecting it. It is 50 years old, Vecca said, still not quite steady. That bird is 50 years old, and it has been eating your supper since before your wife met you, and you have never once caught it. And you go out every morning, and you set the fish down in the same place. She wiped her eyes with her thumb. You are not at war. You are keeping it. Thomas opened his mouth and found he had absolutely nothing to say to that. Something in the small, cold morning shifted about a hand's width, and neither of them named it. The peace lasted about as long as the fish did. She discovered, over the following days, that she could not sit still without going somewhere in her head that she did not want to go, and so she began to work, badly and against orders. She reorganized his net shed. He had not asked her to. He came back from the lamp room and found 4 years of accumulated system taken apart and rebuilt along entirely different principles, and stood in the doorway for some time. "Your lines were coiled against the lay," Vecca said, from inside. "All of them, everyone, for 4 years. They worked fine, they worked. They were not fine. A line coiled against its lay develops a memory, and the memory becomes a kink, and the kink becomes the place it parts." She emerged, dusting her hands. "You have been using a rope that was waiting for a reason. I've been using that rope since. I know how long you have been using it," she said. "That is my point." He looked past her into the shed. It was, he had to admit, better. Everything was better. The hooks were sorted by size, which he had been meaning to do since the year before last. "You're supposed to be resting," he said. I rested. "It was extremely dull, and I will not be doing it again." 2 days later she made the stew. She informed him that she would not lie in a man's house eating a man's fish while doing nothing to earn either, and that she had provisioned a warship for 9 years and could certainly manage 1 pot, and Tomas, who was learning, said only that the barley was in the crock by the door and went up to trim the wick. He came down 91 steps and knew from the landing that something had gone badly wrong. What Vecca had produced could have stripped tar off a hull. She had used the whole of the salt, because on the Iron Tide you salted for a 9-week passage, and salt was how you kept a thing from turning. She had boiled the barley to paste, and she had put in an entire fistful of dried thyme on the grounds that it smelled promising. Tomas ate a full bowl of it. He ate it straight-faced, sweating slightly, and told her gravely that it had character. Vecca watched him get through the second spoonful and told him flatly that he was a liar and a coward, and that among her people a man who lied to be kind was considered to have insulted you twice. "It's not a lie," Tomas said. "It has character. I never said it was good." She laughed again then, at herself this time, and it was a better sound than the first one had been. He kept that pot going for 3 days, rather than admit defeat. And something happened that neither of them noticed at the time, which was that the ruined stew became the thing they measured the days by. The other collisions came thick after that. She greeted him one morning the way she would have greeted a shipmate, which is to say she brought the flat of her hand against his shoulder as she went past, and Tomas went into the doorframe and had to be helped up. "Why are you like this?" he said from the floor. "That is a greeting, that is an assault. On my deck a man who is not struck in the morning begins to wonder what he has done wrong." She hauled him upright by the collar with one hand, entirely without effort, which he found he minded less than he expected to. "You are very light. It is like living with a bird." She asked him on the 9th day, appropriate of nothing at all, whether he intended to remain unmarried, because she had been observing him for over a week and could see no structural reason for it. Tomas dropped a pan. "Among humans," he said when he had retrieved it, "you generally lead up to a question like that. Lead up to it. How? I don't know. Weather, fish prices. Something for about a month. That is a waste of a month," Vecca said, "and at the end of it you would ask the same question and receive the same answer, and you would have had a month of pretending to care about fish prices." She considered him. "Among orcs, it is thought discourteous to make someone guess what you are thinking about them. It means you intend to change your mind and want no witness." Tomas thought about that for a moment. "That's actually not stupid," he admitted. "No," she agreed, "it is not." He gave her the sea glass on the 10th evening. It was not planned. She had picked up the deep blue piece off the low shelf, turning it toward the fire, and he had come in and stopped, and she had put it back at once. "You can hold it," he said. "It is his." "It's a bit of a broken bottle," Tomas said. "A ship's boy chucked it off a coaster 20 years ago, and the sea rolled it around until it was worth keeping. He came over and picked it up and turned it in his fingers. Wen used to say that. He liked that it took the sea about that long to make one. He'd walk the East Strand after every blow and come back with pockets full, and about 2 of them would be good." He held it out to her. "Take that one. I will not take your sons." He collected them so they'd be looked at, Tomas said. "They've been on that shelf for 4 years, and I'm the only one who's looked. and I've stopped seeing it." He pushed it into her hand and closed her fingers over it, which took both of his. "Take the blue one. Blue's the rare one. He'd have given you the blue one inside of 10 minutes. He had no sense about it at all." Vecca stood holding a piece of sea glass in a fist that could have crushed it to powder. She did not say thank you. Among her people, you did not thank someone for kindness. You remembered it, and you paid it back tenfold when their own hour came. He did not know it yet, but she had just made him a promise. She asked him on the 12th night, and it cost her more to ask than anything had cost her in years. She had been sitting with the cut cord in her hands for the better part of an hour, and Tomas had been at the table with the hull model in front of him and the rusted plane beside it, not working on it, only sitting near it, which was a thing he did some evenings without seeming to notice he was doing it. "There is something I want," Vecca said. Thomas looked up. "It is not a small thing, and I do not know how to ask for it, because I have not asked anyone for anything since I was 24 years old." Her jaw was set. "So I am going to say it badly, and you will have to forgive that. Go on." She laid the leather on the table. "A cord can be mended," she said. "It is the first thing a captain is taught. If a cord is damaged, you do not begin a new one, because a new one is a new ship, and a new ship means the old one is finished. You mend it. You lay in a splice, and you retie the knots, and it goes on, all right. I cannot mend this one." She turned her right hand over and looked at it, the great ridged scar across the back of it, the fingers that could bend an iron hook. "The knots are small," she said. "They are made small on purpose so that 40 of them will sit on a forearm's length of leather. They want 2 hands working close, and they want fine work, and I have." She stopped. "My hands are not for this. They never were. My mother's were not either. It is done by the ship's rope worker, always in front of the crew, and my rope worker is at the bottom of your reef." Thomas said nothing, and there is a second difficulty, Vecca said, which is that a captain's cord is not touched by anyone outside the clans. Not ever. It is the most private thing an orc owns. It is rank and name and every soul you are answerable for, all worked into one length of leather, and you may not hand it to a stranger any more than a man may hand a stranger his own hands. She looked at him. "You are a fisherman," she said. "You have been putting knots into rope since you could stand up. I have watched you do it for 12 days. You tied a bowline in the dark yesterday, with one hand while carrying a bucket in the other, and you did not look at it. That's not a difficult knot. It is not a difficult knot for you." She pushed the leather an inch across the table toward him. "I am asking you to mend my cord." The fire ticked. Thomas Vale understood in a general way that he had just been handed something. He did not yet understand how much. He looked at the short length of cut black leather with its 4 surviving knots, and thought about a woman who had spent 9 years being the person everybody else could put their weight on, and who had sat on his floor for 12 days holding a piece of her own history in a fist she could not open. "I don't know your knots," he said. "No, you will have to be taught by them, and I am not a patient teacher, and I will say things to you that you will not enjoy. That's fine. You have not heard these things. I've been shouted at by my father over a 1/4 inch of oak," Tomas said. "I'll survive an orc." Vecca almost smiled. It took 3 nights. The first night was a failure so total that she nearly called the whole thing off. She talked him through the base knot, the one that every rank is built out of, and he got it wrong 11 times, and on the 12th he got it right and could not reproduce it, and she said something in her own language that he did not need translated. "Say it in mine," Tomas said, "if you're going to say it." "I said your hands are very clever and your head is a stone. That's fair. It is not a criticism," Vecca said irritably. "It is the problem. You are trying to remember it. You cannot remember it. Nobody remembers 40 knots. You must learn it the way you learned your own, which is that your hands do it and your head is somewhere else entirely." She took his wrists. It was the first time she had touched him deliberately, and she registered how small the bones in them were and how hard the tendons stood up under the skin, and she filed both facts away without examining why. "Stop looking," she said. "Close your eyes." "How am I meant to?" "Close your eyes." It is dark on a deck. It is dark in a hole. A cord is red in the dark. If you can only do it in the light, you cannot do it. He closed his eyes and she moved his fingers through it, and he got it on the 4th try. And on the 6th try he did it without her, in the dark, and did not know he had done it until she let go of his wrists. The second night went better. They got through the working ranks: deckhand, rope worker, cook, carpenter, sailmaker. Each one was the base knot with a change in it, an extra turn, a crossed bite, a doubled pass, and Tomas began to see the logic under it and, being a man who had spent his life around the grammar of rope, began to enjoy it. Whoever built this system was a boatwright, he said. Whoever built this system was a woman 400 years ago who was tired of losing count. Same thing. Vecca considered that and let it stand. She named them as he tied them, and this was the part that undid him, because she did not only name the ranks, she named the people. That is a helmsman's knot. That is Ruda, 29 years old, best hand on the following sea I have ever had, could not be trusted with money, owed half the deck something. A pause. Tie it again. He tied it again. That is the rope worker's knot. That is Anse, 61, deaf in one ear, which he denied for 11 years. Her voice did not change at all. He made this cord for me. He made the whole of it the day I took the ship. Tie it again. He tied it again. That is a ship's boy. That is Tick. 14. She stopped. Tie it again. He tied it again, and did not look up, because he could hear that she needed him not to. On the 3rd night they came to the last of it, and Vecca told him how the join was made. The cut ends laid together and whipped over, so that the men stood proud of the cord and could be felt in the dark, a bump under the thumb that said, "Here, this is where I lost people. Count carefully." "How many joins are on it now?" Tomas asked. 11. He worked in silence for a while, and when the 6 come back, he said, "The 6 who went into the boat, you'll tie them back in. If they come back, when they come back, you'll tie them back in." Vecca looked at the side of his face in the firelight for a long moment. "Yes," she said. "When they come back, I will tie them back in." It was 2 hours past midnight when he finished it. He had gone on past the point where the light was any good, working by feel with his eyes half shut, and he laid in the last whipping turn and pulled it home and set the cord down on the table and flexed his hands, which had gone numb somewhere around the 3rd hour. "That's it," he said. Vecca picked it up. She held it in both hands and did not look at it. She closed her eyes and ran her thumb along the whole length of it, slowly, from the collar end to the tail, over the 4 original knots, and over every new one, and over the 11 old joins, and the new one, reading it the way she had been taught to read it at 14 years old on her mother's deck. She sat like that for a long time, then she folded her hand around it and held it against her chest, and did not say anything at all. Tomas got up quietly and put the kettle over the fire, because he could not think of anything else to do with himself. "The last hands to touch this," Vecca said. "Cut it!" He turned around. She was still sitting with her eyes closed. "It was on my belt when the deck went," she said. "It went into the water with me. Something took it, a spar or the rock or a hand. I do not know, and I will never know, and I have not been able to stop thinking about which." Her thumb moved over the new join. "I have been assuming for 12 days that the last thing that ever touched my cord was whatever it was that ended my ship." She opened her eyes. "It was not," she said. "It was you." Tomas stood by the fire with the kettle in his hand and had absolutely no idea what to do with his face. "It's not a fine job," he said at last, because he had to say something. "The joint's proud. I'd have done better with proper waxed thread and a light." "It is not a fine job," Vecca agreed. "It is whole." She put the cord back on her belt the next morning, and something in the way she moved was different, and it stayed different, and Tomas noticed it and said nothing. And then, on the 14th day, he put the cut rope on the table, and everything changed. He had been thinking about it since the night she had told him about the cable. He had not raised it, because she had been carrying enough, and because he had wanted to be sure, and being sure had meant 3 trips down to the eastern shelf at low water, going over the spar wreck that had come ashore, looking for the piece he needed. He found it on the 3rd trip. a short length still made fast around a broken cleat. He brought both pieces in and laid them side by side on the scrub table in the morning light. "Look at these," he said. Vecca came and looked. "This one," Tomas said, touching the shorter piece, "is off a spar that came ashore Tuesday. Same rope, same lay, same tar, same season. That's your cable." "Agreed, agreed." That end parted. He turned it so the light caught it. "That's what a line does when it fails under load. The strands pull long. They come apart at different lengths, because the outer ones go first and the inner ones hang on, and you get that broom. Every rope that ever broke in the history of rope looks like that." "Yes." Then he pushed the other piece forward, the one she had come out of the water holding. "Now look at that." Vecca looked at it. The end was flat. It was very slightly angled, the way a cut goes when the blade is not quite square to the work, and the strands ended together, all at the same length, all clean. She did not say anything. "There's more," Tomas said quietly. "It's not cut all the way. Look at the shoulder of it. There, where the tars scored. Somebody went at it about 3/4 through and left the last quarter." "Why?" said Vecca, and it did not come out as a question. "Because a rope cut clean through goes slack straight away, and everybody knows. A rope cut 3/4 through holds fine until it doesn't." He straightened up. "It holds while you're rigging it. It holds while you're getting your boats swung out. And then the sea puts one good load on it, and it lets go all at once, at whatever moment the sea chooses. And there's not a man aboard who could tell you it wasn't the weather." The room was very quiet. Vecca stood with both hands flat on the table. "You have known this for 2 weeks," she said. "I've suspected it for 2 weeks. I've known about it for 2 days. He met her eyes. "I wasn't going to put that in front of you until I could prove it. You'd have taken it apart in about 4 minutes if I'd got it wrong, and then you'd never have believed the right version when it came." She absorbed that. "That is correct," she said. "That is exactly what I would have done." Then she picked up the cut end and held it, and Tomas watched the captain he had not yet properly met rise up out of her, cold and enormously still, and underneath the cold, something that he recognized because he had lived in it himself for 4 years, which was fear. "It was made fast by me," she said. "I laid that line myself. It was loud when it left my hands, then somebody was at it after. There were 9 minutes, Vecca said. 9 minutes between my making it fast and the boats going over. I was looking forward to the whole thing." Her thumb moved over the flat end. "Anyone on that deck could have been at the cleat in 9 minutes, and no one would have looked at them twice, because every soul aboard was working, and no one looked at a man working. Vecca!" "6 went into the boat," she said, and now her voice had dropped very low. "6. And I have been on my knees for 2 weeks over 34, and it did not once occur to me to wonder about the 6, because they were mine, because I counted them in myself." She looked up. "One of the 6 did that. One of the 6 people I put into that boat with my own hands, cut my cable and killed my ship, and then got into a boat and rowed away east, and I am the one who chose them." Tomas started to say something. He did not get to say it, because at that moment the dog on the far cottage roof, not a dog, the wind vane, which shrieked when it swung more than a point, went round hard, and through the window over Vecca's shoulder he saw a boat coming round the point of Cordrek Rock under oars, with 3 men in her, pulling for his slip, and on the stern sheets, sitting very straight in a black coat, a 4th. "Get in the net shed," Tomas said. "No, Vecca, I do not hide," she said. "I have never hidden in my life, and I am not going to begin on a human rock while men come to a door that is not mine. They're not coming for the door." He was already moving, pulling his coat off the peg. "They're coming for you, and you don't know what they're carrying, and I do, because I've dealt with that office for 4 years. He turned in the doorway. "It's not a blade, it's paper, and paper is the only thing on God's earth you can't fight. And you can't argue with it either, because it doesn't listen and it doesn't get tired. Then what do you propose to do about it?" "Lie," said Tomas Val, and he went out and pulled the door behind him. The boat came alongside the slip, and the 3 Ellet men shipped their oars, and Osric Fenn stepped out onto the stone without getting his boots wet, which took a certain amount of practice. Mr. Vale, harbour master. Fenn looked around the island with mild interest, the way a man looks at a page of accounts. You've had weather. We've had February. Indeed. Fenn drew a folded paper from inside his coat, but did not open it. There was a wreck on your reef a fortnight ago. A northern hull. Iron tide out of the clan anchorages, 40 aboard. You reported it. I filed it with the board on the 6th, same as I filed everything. Tomas's voice was perfectly level. You'll have had it by now, or your clerk will. I've had it. Fenn's grey eyes came round to him. It is a very short report. It was a very bad night. Fenn let that sit for a moment. You wrote that you observed the vessel strike, that you attempted the eastern shelf, and that you recovered no persons. That is the whole of it. 4 lines. That's what happened. You recovered no persons at all. I recovered a great deal of spar wreck and about 90 fathoms of good rope, Tomas said. You're welcome to come and look at it. It's stacked behind the shed, and I've made no secret of it, and I'll declare every foot of it when the salvage returns come round in April, same as always. Fenn smiled very slightly. Mr. Vale, he said, I have been 30 years at this, and I want to be plain with you, because I think you are an honest man, and I would rather not waste an honest man's morning. There are 6 orcs sitting in the parish barn at Ferro Sands. They came ashore in a ship's boat on the night of the 4th, and they have been fed at that parish's expense for a fortnight, and under Section 9 of the Salvage Act, that expense is recoverable, and next Thursday the harbour court will fix the term of it. Thomas's face did not move. Behind it, something did. Six of them are alive. 6 of them were alive and sitting in a barn 12 miles up the coast, and one of those 6 had put a knife to a cable in 9 minutes of darkness. The court will fix a term, Fenn said, and the term will be about 4 years, and I will tell you frankly that I intend to place them at the Ellet Yards, where there is a shortage of heavy labour, and where they will be housed and fed and worked, and at the end of it they will be free to go home. He paused. I am aware of how that sounds. I would ask you to consider what the alternative is. The Crown pays nothing. Ferro Parish cannot feed 6 orcs on air. Somebody's money keeps them alive between now and the spring sailing, and the law says whose. And if a 7th turned up, Tomas said, then a 7th would go into the same barn and the same court and the same yard, Fenn said, and I would have no more feeling about it than I have about the tide table. He held Tomas's eye. Is there a 7th, Mr. Vale? The lamp went round above them. It did that all day, uselessly, because he had never worked out how to stop it, and had long since stopped wanting to. No, said Tomas. Fenn looked at him for what felt like a long time. You know, he said at last, that if you were to be found sheltering a person subject to a salvage claim, that person's maintenance would be assessed against you. Personally, your wage from the Lighthouse Board is £11 a year, and it is paid through this office. I know what my wage is. Yes, Fenn said. I imagine you do. He put the folded paper back inside his coat, unopened, which Tomas understood was the entire point of it having been produced at all. Well, Fenn said, the Ellet men will want to go over your east strand at low water for the rest of the spar wreck. I'll send them Thursday week. They can come Thursday week. Good day, Mr. Vale. He stepped back into the boat without getting his boots wet, and the oars went out, and the 3 men pulled her round the point. Tomas stood on the slip until they were out of sight, and then for another 2 minutes after that, because his legs had gone peculiar. When he came back into the cottage, Vecca was standing exactly where he had left her, with both hands flat on the table. 6, she said, Ferro Sands, a barn, 12 miles up the coast. He hung his coat up and found that his hands were not entirely steady. Fed at the parish's expense for a fortnight, which he'll be counting to the penny. They are alive. They're alive. Vecca closed her eyes, and for a moment the whole enormous frame of her seemed to go down about an inch, as though something had been lifted off it that she had been holding without permission to put down. Then she opened them. You lied to me, she said. I did. To an officer of your own people, in your own doorway, knowing what he could do to you. She was watching him very closely now. Why? And Thomas, who had been thinking about very little else for the last 400 seconds, said the truest thing he had. Because he called it arithmetic, he said, "And I've had a bellyful of men doing arithmetic about people. There was a coroner's clerk who sat in that chair 4 years ago and did arithmetic on me about a boy who was 9, and I have never in my life wanted to hit anybody the way I wanted to hit him, and I didn't, and I've regretted it ever since." He looked up. "So no, he's not putting you in a barn." The weather turned on the 18th day. It went out overnight the way it does at the back end of a hard February, the wind swinging round into the northwest and dropping, and by the morning the sky was that thin, scoured blue that comes after a long blow, and the sea in the channel was moving in ordinary green swells, instead of that black, hurrying thing it had been for 2 weeks. Thomas came down from the lamp room and found her standing outside the door, looking at it. Her ribs had been knitted. She was walking without favouring the hip. She had her cord on her belt and her boots on, and her hair rebraided into 6 rows, and she was looking east, at the smudge of the mainland and the 3 low islands between. He knew what it was before she said anything. "I can make the crossing," Vecca said. "You can? There is a shore road from Ferro Sands north. If I go up the coast and across the head of the bay, I am in Clan country in 11 days on foot." She did not turn around. "Sooner if I take a boat off a beach, which I would rather not do, but I have done worse. You'd be walking into the only part of the country where every man's been told to look for you, yes. And then what? And then I bring my 6 people out of that barn," she said, "and I find out which of them did it, and I take them home, and I stand in front of the fleet meeting at the spring, and I say what happened to my ship." Her hands were at her sides. "I have thought about very little else for 2 days." Thomas stood in his doorway. He had known this was coming from the first morning. He had known it in the same practical way he knew the tide, and he had built nothing on top of it, and had been careful, and had said nothing at all for 18 days. And now the weather was fair, and she was standing on his path with her boots on, and he discovered that being careful had not helped in the slightest. "When would you go?" he said. "The wind holds for 3 days. It should be tomorrow." She paused. "It should have been today. Why wasn't it today?" Vecca did not answer that. The gull came over the wall and landed on the fish stone, and looked at them both with complete contempt and no fish at all, and went away again. "You have not asked me to stay," she said. "No. Why not? Because you're a fleet officer with 34 people at the bottom of my reef and 6 in a barn." Thomas said, "And I'm a lamp keeper on a rock with 11 pounds a year, and I've got no right to put 1 single ounce on the scale against any of that." He said it steadily. "Whatever I want doesn't come into it. It would just be 1 more weight on you. And you've been carrying weight since you were 19, and I'm not going to be the last man in your life who hands you something to hold." Vecca turned around. "That," she said, "is the most human thing you have ever said to me, and I want you to understand that I mean it as an insult." Thomas blinked. "You have decided what is good for me," she said, "and you have decided it privately, and you have arranged your face and your voice so that I will not be burdened by knowing what you actually think. That is exactly what my council does. That is what every officer in my fleet has done to me since I was 24 years old, and every one of them believed they were being kind, and the sum of 9 years of it is that I did not know 1 single person who would tell me the truth, and that is how a man got close enough to my cable to cut it." She came down the path towards him. "I am not asking what is good for me," she said. "I am asking what you want. Say it or do not say it, but do not stand in your own doorway and manage me." Thomas Vale looked up at a woman half again his size on a bare rock in the middle of the sea, and the last 4 years came off him all at once, and he was so tired of being careful that he could have sat down in the path. "Stay," he said. She went very still. "Not until the weather turns," he said. "Not until the 6 are out or the spring meet or any of it. I've said that once already, and I meant it as nothing, and it turned out I didn't know what I was saying." He held her eyes. "I'm saying it properly this time. Stay. There's no term for it. There's no price on it. I've got a bad shoulder, 11 pounds a year, a house with 2 chairs in it, and one of them's been empty 4 years. And it's all yours if you want it, and if you don't want it, I'll put you across to the mainland myself in the morning, and I'll never say another word about it." The wind came around the corner of the house, Vecca of the Iron Tide, who had commanded a warship at 24, and buried her mother at sea at 19, and had never in 33 years been offered a single thing without a term attached to it, stood in front of a lamp-keeper's door, and found that her hands were shaking, which had not happened to her on the night her ship went down, because she understood what he had just done, and he did not. Among her people, a shelter offered without conditions is not hospitality. It is the oldest binding there is, older than the clans, from the time when a northern winter could be survived by 2 and not by 1. It is offered perhaps twice in a lifetime. It is never offered lightly, and it is never, ever offered by the person with less to give, because the whole weight of it falls on them. And he had done it in a doorway, in the wind, in a coat with a mended sleeve, and had then immediately offered to row her away from it, so she would not feel obliged. "Do you know what you have said?" she asked. "I know exactly what I've said." "No," Vecca said, "you do not, and I am going to answer you anyway, because I have spent 18 days in your house, and I have watched you give away your fish and your bed and your son's blue glass, and lie to your own harbour-master's face for a stranger, and I have been waiting the whole of that time to find the price, and there is not one." She stepped up onto the stone. "So," she said, "then I stay forever." Thomas opened his mouth. "That is not an agreement," she said. "That is the answer. There is only one, and I have just given it, and among my people it cannot be given twice, and it cannot be taken back, and there were witnesses, and I am not sorry." "What witnesses?" Vecca looked out at the sea, and then at the lamp house behind them, still turning. "That," she said, "and that," and then she put one enormous hand flat against the doorframe beside his head, and bent and set her brow against his, hard, the way her people had done it for 400 years, and stayed there. Neither of them said anything for a while. "If Thomas and Vecca have pulled you this far, take 1 second for us. Subscribe to Orc Story, and tell us in the comments. Would you have said stay? Your likes and comments are what carry these tales to the people who need them. And the best part of their story is only beginning. They had 4 days. They were the best 4 days either of them had had in years. And both of them knew what was waiting at the end of the week, a barn at Ferro Sands, a harbour court, and one of 6 people who had already killed 34, and that knowing was in every hour of it, like salt in bread. She moved the coil of the net line off the second chair and sat in it, and Thomas came in from the slip and saw her there, and had to stand still in the doorway for a moment. He took the plane to the hull model and got the rust off the blade and decked her out, working the evenings, and she watched him do it and asked questions, and he answered them badly because he was out of practice at explaining anything to anybody. "Who was she for?" Vecca asked. "Nobody. That's the trouble." He turned the little hull over. "She's a 22-foot working boat with a lug rig. There's no market for her. Everyone wants the yard-built ones out of Kesson now. They're cheaper, and they're rubbish, and they last 9 years. He set it down. "I built her to show a man who never came, then build her for yourself. With what money? You have a rock covered in 90 fathoms of good rope and 4 years of spar wreck," Vecca said, "and I have a fleet, and you are about to discover that my people are extremely difficult to be modest at." On the 3rd morning, the 6 pieces of sea glass on the low shelf became 11, because she had been walking the east strand at low water without telling him. On the 4th night, he fell asleep in the chair. He had been up 2 nights running with a bad feed on the lamp, and he sat down after supper and was gone inside 4 minutes, and his head went sideways and came to rest against her arm. He woke stiff and cold in the grey before dawn. She had not moved, not once in 6 hours. Her arm had gone dead underneath his weight, and she had let it, because she had not wanted to wake him. Neither of them mentioned it. They did not need to. But she had done for him, without instruction and without a word, the exact thing he had done for her the first night, and something in the house was different afterward. And then, on the 5th morning, Tomas came out at first light and stopped dead on the path, because the whole eastern horizon had changed shape overnight. There were 9 ships standing in toward Cordrek Rock under a shortened sail. They came in around the point in a line and anchored in the deep water off the eastern shelf, and they were nothing like the coasters Tomas had watched go past that rock for 4 years. They were long and black-hulled and heavy in the water, and the rigging was different, and there was no name painted anywhere on any of them, because among the clans a ship's name is on her cord and nowhere else. The first boat came in under 8 oars. Vecca was standing on the slip in her mended shirt with her cord on her belt, and Tomas stood 4 feet behind her because he had not been able to think of anywhere better to be. The boat came alongside, and a very large, very old orc stood up in the bow. He was easily 70. He had a white beard bound in 3 rings and 1 arm, the left ended just below the elbow, and the sleeve was pinned up neat and square. And when he saw Vecca standing on the stones, he stopped absolutely still with 1 hand on the gunwale and did not move for several seconds. Then he stepped out onto the slip and went down onto 1 knee on the wet stone, and behind him every orc in the boat did the same. "Get up, Braga," Vecca said. "No," said the old orc. "That is an order, it is." He stayed where he was, and his voice had gone thick. "I have been 18 days telling the fleet that you were alive, and I have been believed by nobody at all. And I am going to have my knee on this rock for as long as I want it there, Captain, and you may put it in the log." Vecca's mouth moved slightly. "How did you find me, the parish men at Ferro Sands?" Braga got up, heavily, using 1 hand on his thigh. "6 of ours in a barn there, and a harbour master measuring them for a yard. And I put 4 ships into that anchorage on Tuesday and made it clear to the parish that this was going to be an expensive misunderstanding for somebody." He wiped his face with the back of his wrist and did not pretend he hadn't. "One of them said the fisherman on the rock had been asking after a 7th. So I came to the rock." Then he saw Tomas. He looked at him for a long moment, a thin human in a coat with a mended sleeve, a bad shoulder, standing 4 feet behind a fleet captain in a way that was not deference and was not possession and was something the old orc did not have an immediate word for. "That is him," Braga said. It was not a question. "That is him." Braga came up the slip. He stopped in front of Tomas, and Tomas, who was 5'9", found himself looking at a chest. "You went into the channel," Braga said. "I had a net line out. It wasn't." "Do not do that," said the old orc. "Do not make it small. I have been 51 years at sea, and I know exactly what that channel does in a February blow, and I know what 1 man with a line can and cannot do in it. And I am telling you that you did the second thing." He held out his 1 hand. "Braga, Bozoon of the Fleet Met. I taught her mother." Tomas put his hand out and had it swallowed. Tomas Vale. Braga looked past him at the cottage, the boarded windows of the 2 empty houses, the path worn pale by 1 pair of boots. "How long have you been on this rock alone, Tomas Vale?" 4 years, said Braga again, and let go of his hand, and did not say anything else about it, which Tomas found he was grateful for. It was in the next hour that everything rearranged itself. He had known she was a captain. She had told him that on the 4th night. What he had not understood, what nobody had thought to say, because to them it was like explaining that water is wet, was what a captain in the northern clans actually is. He watched 9 ships' worth of officers come ashore onto his island and go down onto the stones. He watched Braga, 70 years old, 1 arm, bosun of the whole fleet meet, stand behind her shoulder and wait to be spoken to. He heard her give 6 orders in her own language in the space of 4 minutes, and watched 6 boats put out to do them. And somewhere in the middle of it he heard Braga refer to her, to another officer, as heavy water captain of the Northern Line. "What's that mean?" Tomas asked him quietly. Braga looked round. "You do not know?" "I know she's a captain," she said. Braga made a sound in his chest. "There are 4 heavy water captains in the northern clans. 4. There is the fleet meet, which is 11 old men and women who argue, and there are the 4 who decide." He considered Tomas. "When she is at the meet, she sits 3rd. When her ship is at sea, she is answerable to nobody living. She is the youngest to hold it in 200 years, and there were 8 houses that fought it and lost. Tomas absorbed this. Right, he said. You have been feeding her burnt barley, said Braga. She burnt it herself, actually. The old orc laughed so hard he had to sit down on a rock, but it did something to Tomas all the same. And it did not go away over the rest of that day. It was not awe. He had expected awe, and it did not come. What came instead was worse and smaller and entirely personal, and it caught him completely off guard, and it hurt. He got it out that night, badly, standing at the end of the table while 9 ships' worth of lanterns burned out in his bay. Third at the meat, he said. Vecca set down what she was holding. You let me hand you warm stones, Tomas said. You let me sit on that floor and tell you about my boy. You ate that stew. You sat in that chair. And I asked you to stay in a house with 2 chairs and £11 a year. And you, his voice went, you had 4 ships in an anchorage 12 miles away that would have come the second. They knew where to look. Yes, you could have had a boat off this rock in a day. Yes, then why in God's name did you not tell me who you were? And Vecca of the Iron Tide, who had a fleet standing off the eastern shelf and 9 years of iron behind her, looked at a lamp keeper and let the whole of it come apart in front of him, which she had never done in her life in front of anybody, because for 18 days nobody stood up when I came into the room, she said. Tomas stopped. Do you understand what that is? She said. You do not. Nobody who has not had it can understand it. Since I was 24, every room I have entered has changed shape around me. Every conversation stops and restarts differently. Every person who has ever laughed near me has checked my face first to see whether it was permitted. Her hands were flat on the table. I have been carried and fed and defended and obeyed. I have never once been ordinary. She looked up. And I came into your house half dead, and you told me to stop dripping on your floor, she said. And I have been ordinary here. I have been an irritating houseguest who wrecked your net shed and could not make soup, and you have been rude to me twice a day for 18 days, and it has been the happiest fortnight of my adult life, and every single day I did not tell you. I knew I was stealing it. You weren't stealing. I was, she said. I knew exactly what would happen the moment I said it. This, exactly this. Your face is doing exactly what it is doing now. She stopped and then said more quietly, I am not afraid of very much. I was afraid of that. The fire ticked. Tomas came round the table and stood in front of her. I don't care that you're third at the meet, he said. I want that on the record. I care that you didn't think I'd hold up. That's the bit that hurt. He looked at her. And I want you to know that I've thought about it for 6 hours, and I've decided you were right to be afraid. Because if you'd told me on the 4th night, I'd have gone quiet and got small and put you across to the mainland inside of a week, and I'd have called it doing the decent thing. He shook his head. So we'll say you were right, and I was going to be a coward about it, and I'd rather have had the fortnight. Vecca let out a long breath. Among my people, she said. That is called an apology from both sides at once, and it is considered very poor form, because nobody can tell who won. Nobody won. That's rather the point of it. Yes, she said. I am beginning to see the appeal. The harbour court sat at Ellet Bay on Thursday, and Osric Fenn lost it in 11 minutes, and he lost it to paper. He had built his case carefully, and it was a good one, and it would have held against almost anybody. Section 9. 6 foreign persons landed off a wreck, maintained at parish expense, term to be fixed. He had the parish accounts, and he had the Ferro constable, and he had 30 years of everyone in that room having always done what he suggested. What he had not accounted for was that the lamp keeper on Cordrek Rock had been filing wreck returns to the Lighthouse Board for 4 years, and had never once thrown a copy away. Tomas stood up in a stone room full of men who had known his father and put a folded oilskin packet on the table. Section 9 applies to persons wrecked within 3 miles of a licensed anchorage, he said. This anchorage is licensed from the harbour mouth. The Cordrek Reef is at 5¼ miles by the board's own survey, which is the survey the light was built off, and it's in the schedule at the back of the licence, and it's been there since 1809. Fenn did not move. "That's the first thing," Thomas said. "The second thing is that Section 9 says the salver may recover. It doesn't say the anchorage may. It says the salver. And the 6 people at Ferro Sands weren't salvaged by anybody. They came ashore on their own in their own ship's boat under their own oars and walked up a beach, and there's not a man in this room who put a hand out to them, and the Ferro constable will say so because he wrote it in his own book on the 5th. He set the packet down. "And the third thing," he said, "is that I've been sending the board a wreck return off that rock every quarter for 4 years, and there've been 11 vessels lost or damaged on that reef since I've been out there, and every one of the crews came off it as distressed mariners under the ordinary law, and were fed by their parish, and went home, and nobody ever once opened Section 9 at them." He looked down at the table. 9 of those 11 were our own. The 10th was Dutch. He paused. "So it's not the law that's changed," he said. "It's just the first time they've been green." There was a silence in the room of a very particular kind. The court took 40 minutes and dismissed the claim as improperly founded, and awarded the 6 mariners of the Iron Tide their relief under the ordinary provision, and the parish of Ferro Sands £11 4 shillings for their keep, which Braga paid on the spot in northern silver and then declined to take the change. Fenn came out onto the steps afterward and stood beside Thomas for a moment, buttoning his coat. 5¼ miles, he said. "By your own survey." "Yes." Fenn finished the top button. "I have never read the schedule at the back of that license in 30 years. He said it with a kind of clinical interest, as though examining a fault in a wall. "You understand that this was not personal, Mr. Vale. It was never personal." "I know," Thomas said. "That's the worst thing about you." Fenn considered that. "Possibly," he said, and put on his hat and went down the steps. And it should have ended there. It did not end there, because the winter had one more thing in it, and it was not Fenn, and no law could be argued at it. The 6 from the barn came out to Cordwreck Rock that week while the fleet watered, and among them was the ship's boy, Tick, who was 14, and who had been 3 weeks damp in a parish barn with a cough he had been hiding, because ship's boys hide everything. It went down into his chest on Tuesday. Thomas knew the look. He had watched it before, in a different room, on a different island, in the same month of the same kind of year. He sat up with him for 6 nights. He did every single thing that a lifetime of hard-won knowledge had taught him. The steam, the propped pillows, the cold clothes and the warm ones. The copper warming pan filled from the fire and wrapped in flannel and set at the boy's feet. Twice a night, every night, because a body fighting something needs its feet warm, and nobody ever believes that until they've seen it work. On the 6th night, Tick died anyway, quietly, near dawn, the way his own son had. Thomas carried him down and would not let anybody else do it. And then something in him that had held for 4 years and 18 days simply stopped holding. And the man who had gone into the channel on a net line and lied to a harbour master in his own doorway and stood up in a stone room full of his father's friends, sat down on the floor of his own kitchen with his back against the wall and could not get up again. He was certain, past all arguments, that he was a man who failed the ones who needed him most, that he always had been, that the kindness in his hands was a lie because it never once arrived in time, and that everyone who had ever depended on him had been mistaken to. Vecca found him there, and she did for him, without one word of instruction from anybody, the exact thing he had done for her. She did not tell him it was not his fault, because he would not have heard it. She went to the fire and filled the copper pan and wrapped it in flannel and put it into his hands, which were cold. Then she sat down on the floor beside him, within reach and no closer, and stayed. She stayed a long time, and when the worst of it had gone through him and out, she gave him back his own medicine in her own blunt words. "Some fights are lost before they are offered," she said. "You know that. You told me that on the 4th night about a cable I did not cut. That's different. It is not different, and you would not allow me the excuse, so I am not allowing you it." She did not look at him. He was 14 and he had 3 weeks in a wet barn before he ever reached your door. "You did not put him in the barn." "I couldn't." You did not fail him, Vecca said. Listen to me. He died warm and held, and in a house, with somebody's hands on him. There are 34 of my people who did not get that, and I will spend the whole of my life knowing it. Her voice did not shake. So do not sit on this floor and tell me that is nothing. It is very nearly everything. It is the only kind of everything any of us are ever actually allowed to give. Thomas put his head back against the wall. I lit that lamp every night for 4 years, he said, for people who were already home. Yes, she said, and on the 4th of February a ship came, and you were on the shelf with a line in your hands for 2 minutes, because you had been ready every night for 4 years. She turned her head. You have never once understood what you were doing out there. You thought you were paying something. You were not. You were waiting. It was the first time in his life he had ever let anyone carry him. It was that, more than the wreck or the cord or the offer in the doorway, that stopped them being two people falling toward one another and made them simply, permanently, home. They buried Tick on the high end of the island, past the lamp house, inside the wall that keeps the wind off, because Vecca asked and Thomas said yes before she had finished the sentence. There were now 4 stones behind that wall. And on the morning after, Braga came up the path with a face like weather coming and said that the fleet had convened aboard the flagship and would have the whole matter of the Iron Tide, and that the captain was required. Not required, Vecca said. Requested. I said what I was told to say, said Braga. And I said it in the order I was told to say it in, and I am 70 years old, and I have earned the right to say it flatly and let you hear what you like in it. She went aboard that afternoon and took Thomas with her, over 3 separate objections from 3 separate officers, all of which she declined to hear. The great cabin of a northern flagship is not a grand room. It is low and dark and smells of tar and lamp oil, and there is one long table bolted to the deck, and 11 old men and women sat around it and looked at a human being for the first time in their lives. Vecca put both pieces of rope on the table. Then she put the mended cord beside them. She spoke for 11 minutes without notes. She laid out the 9 minutes between the making fast and the boats going over. She laid out the score in the tar at the shoulder of the cut. She named the 6 who had gone into the boat in the order she had counted them in herself, and she said that one of those 6 names was a lie and that she intended to find out which. When she finished, the eldest of the meet, a woman called Osha with a face like a cliff, asked the only question that mattered. Who found this? He did, Vecca said. 11 heads turned. He pulled it out of the water in the dark without knowing what it was, she said, and he kept it for 2 weeks and said nothing until he could prove it. And then he went down onto a reef at low water 3 times to find the matching piece so that he could put a broken end and a cut end side by side in front of me and let me see it for myself. She did not raise her voice. There is no orc alive who reads rope better than this man. He mended my cord. The silence in that cabin went on for a rather long time. He mended your cord, Osha repeated. Every knot on it, Vecca said, including the 11 I cut myself. Osha looked at Thomas for what felt to him like a considerable portion of a lifetime. Then we will have the 6 aboard, she said. They came in one at a time. Vecca stood at the head of the table with her cord in her hand and the 2 ends of rope on the wood in front of her, and she asked each of them the same 3 questions in the same flat voice, and she did not accuse anybody of anything. Where were you in the 9 minutes? Who did you see aft of the mainmast? Put your hand on the cleat lashing and tell me how it was made fast. The 5th of them was Skell. He was 31 and thin for an orc, and he had been quartermaster of the Iron Tide for 2 years, and he had wept more openly than anyone in that barn at Ferro Sands, and had led the 6 in the boat, and had been the one who bailed all night and kept them off the rocks at Ferro. And every single one of the other 5 had said his name with gratitude in the last hour. He answered the first question well. He answered the second question well. And on the 3rd question he put his hand out and described a lashing made off with a round turn and 2 half hitches, which is what any sensible person would say, and which is what Vecca had expected, and which was wrong. No, she said. Skell's hand stopped. I do not take off a heavy line with 2 half hitches, Vecca said. I have not since I was 20. My mother would not have it. She said a half hitch is a knot for a man in a hurry, and a hurry is where people die. She turned the cord in her fingers. I made that cleat off with a tugboat hitch and 4 figure 8s and a locking turn under, because that is how it is done on my deck. And every soul aboard knew it because I was insufferable about it, and you are the quartermaster, and you made off more lines on that ship than anybody living. The cabin did not move. So there is only one reason you would not know how that lashing was made, she said, which is that you were not looking at the knot. You were looking at the standing part, 3 feet up, in the dark, with a blade in your hand. Skell said nothing for a moment. Then, very strangely, his shoulders came down about an inch, and he looked almost relieved, the way people do when a thing they have been carrying alone finally becomes somebody else's problem too. It was not supposed to go on the reef, he said. Vecca closed her eyes. It was supposed to lose steerage in the channel and go ashore on the sand at Ferro, Skell said. Soft bottom. Everybody walks off. She's a heavy water hull. She'd have been 6 weeks refloating, and there'd have been a salvage award and a claim and a court, and there was a man on the mainland who— He stopped. There was a man who explained to me what the hull was worth as a claim, and what a share of it was, and how many people it would not hurt. There was a man, Vecca repeated. He never told me his name. He wore a black coat. Skell's voice had gone flat. I have been to the office at Ellet Bay twice. He does the tide books at 1 in the morning, and then the weather came in from the southwest. Vecca said, 3 points off what the glass said, and the current set us 2 miles north of where you had it worked out. And we went onto the Cordrek Reef instead of the sand, yes, and you got into a boat. I put 9 people into a boat, Skell said. 6 of us made it off the reef. I bailed all night. I have not slept. And then he stopped, because there was nothing at the end of that sentence that was worth anything to anybody in the room. Nobody spoke. Then Vecca opened her hand and laid the cord on the table. Bring the whole crew aboard, she said. All of them. The 6, the fleet officers, the meat, the bosun and the human. Every soul has a right to be in the room when this is said, in the daylight on the open deck, with the record kept. Osha stirred. Captain, you are within your right to settle this here. It is your ship and your cable, and the meat will not question it. I know what my right is, Vecca said. I am not taking it. Why not? And Vecca of the Iron Tide looked down the table at 11 old people who had spent 40 years watching captains settle things quietly, and said the thing that would be repeated in the northern clans for a very long time afterward. Because 34 people went down in the dark without a witness, she said, and I am not putting the answer to it in the dark as well. They held it on the open deck the next morning, and it took 4 hours, and it was done properly by the law of the clans, with every voice heard that had a right to be heard, including the other 5 from the boat, who wept, and including Braga, who did not. They did not put Skell to death. Vecca would not have it, and said so once, and did not repeat herself. He was struck from every cord in the Northern Fleet, which meant that no ship could carry him, and no clan house could take him in, and no cord could ever be made to hold his knot again. He was put ashore at the far end of the outer islands with a year of stores, on a rock rather smaller than Cordrek, where the fleet would touch once a year to leave more, and where he would live out whatever he had left with the entire arithmetic of it for company. Braga said afterward that it was the hardest thing he had ever watched a captain do, and the wisest, because a fleet will forgive strength almost anything, but it remembers for 4 generations the captain who chose the open deck over the quiet cabin. The evidence of Skell's testimony went to the Crown at Ellet Bay, and a hearing was opened, and Osric Fenn was suspended from his office pending it. He did not run, and he did not rage. He wrote a letter of 11 pages explaining, in his careful hand, why the entire matter had been a defensible reading of a difficult statute, and he was still writing letters about it a year later, and there was never a single moment in any of it where he appeared to understand what he had done. That, Thomas thought, was the whole of the man. He had never hated anybody in his life. He had simply never once put a person on the correct side of the ledger. They were married on Cordrec Rock in the spring, in the Way of the Clans, which takes about 90 seconds and consists chiefly of two people setting their brows together in front of witnesses, and then everybody eating for 2 days. 3 of the outer houses of the northern clans objected. 2 of them objected loudly enough to withdraw from the fleet meet, and the fleet Vecca kept afterward was smaller than the one she had come into, and she let them go without a backward look. And what remained answered her horn freely, and was, for the first time, entirely and only hers. He never became sailor, and she never asked him to. He became instead a thing the northern clans had never had, which was a shorekeeper, a human who sat at the fleet meet and gave it the one view nobody in that cabin could give it. The reckoning of the small and the frail and the ordinary, the cost of a thing measured in the people it would grind up. He was rude to admirals twice a year, and it did him no harm at all. He built the 22-foot working boat with the lug rig. He built 40 more after it, over the years, in a shed on the eastern shelf with orc apprentices who were far too large for the work, and did it anyway, and northern hulls began to carry a human-built ship's boat on the davits as a point of quiet pride, and nobody could ever quite say when that had started. She never did learn to make the stew. She ruined it faithfully, gloriously, for the rest of their days, and he made it instead every hard evening the way he had that first week, and it stayed their private measure of the year. Once, a long way in, on an evening when the meat had gone badly, and he had come home grey and quiet, she took the pot off him and made it herself, and burnt it black on purpose, and set the bowl down in front of him, and told him gravely, with the whole weight of a heavy water captain behind it, that it had character. He laughed until he had to sit down and put his head on the table. She watched him do it, and looked more pleased with herself than she had the day the meat confirmed her third. She grew softer with him behind their own door than she had ever let herself be with any living soul, and harder and shorter out in the world for having one place where she did not have to be either. For the first time in her life she held the duty and the other thing both at once, and was not made to bleed the one to feed the other. She wore her cord for the rest of her life and never replaced it, though 3 rope workers offered. The joint he had made stayed proud of the leather. She could find it in the dark with her thumb without thinking, and did most days for 30 years. And worked into the collar end of it, where any orc could read it and none could mistake it, she had laid in a single strand of human hair that she had made him give her, run the whole length of a captain's cord. The elders hated it. She wore it to every meeting. The light on Cordrec Rock never went out again. There were 2 of them on the rock now, and then 4, and then in time rather more than that, and the lamp was never once left to a man with a fever in the house and a fault in the feed. Northern ships began to shape their courses off it. Within 6 years there was not a hull in the clan fleet that did not take its departure from the Cordrec Light, and the board on the mainland, who had never sent the part, wrote a letter about the increase in traffic and took full credit for it. The sea glass on the low shelf went from 11 pieces to 140, because every orc who ever landed on that island brought one up from the East Strand, and it became a thing that was simply done, and nobody could tell you who had started it, though everybody knew, and the warming pans spread. That was the strangest of it, and the one Thomas never got used to. On hard nights, in the great stone halls of the northern holds, warriors began setting warm stones and wrapped copper at the feet of the old and the sick and the newly grieving, and expecting nothing back for it. They did not call it a human thing. They would have been insulted to hear it named so, but it had come from a human all the same, and it made them, in some small and stubborn way, into a warmer people than 400 years of iron had ever managed. There was an evening near the turn of a later year when an orphan of the clans, a small orc girl whose parents the Outer Island fighting had taken, was found asleep in the corner of the lamp house where she was not supposed to be, curled up against the warm stone of the chimney breast with something held tight in both fists. When Veka bent to lift her, she saw what it was, a piece of sea glass, the deep blue one, the rare one, and set on the boards beside the child's bare feet, put there by some hand that had gone quietly away, again a copper pan wrapped in flannel. The captain of the Northern Line stood over a sleeping child for a long moment and could not speak. She carried her down to the fire herself, and the girl, half waking, held up the little blue piece for the terrifying captain to admire, and Veka admired it gravely, as though it were the finest thing in all the northern water, which in a way she could not have explained to a single one of her officers. It was that night she leaned into him the way she had, that first evening, by the dying fire, the great warm weight of her settling against his side, and he rested his head on her shoulder the way she had once rested hers against his. They talked about the channel, the net line, the fool in a coat too thin for the weather who had gone down onto the eastern shelf in the dark for something he could not see. They marveled at the sheer, flat unlikeliness of it, that a stolen fish and a ruined pot of barley and a piece of broken bottle worn smooth by 20 years of sea had reached all the way from that one cold room to this one, and that out of such small and foolish things an entire world had been built. She had been a captain who held everything and had never once been seen. He had been a man who had lost the whole of what he loved and believed he had nothing left worth giving, in a world that told them both, plainly and often, that it could not be done. They chose each other anyway. The first word she had ever spoken to him, half drowned on a stone shelf in February, had been a demand to know what he wanted from her. He remembered it. So did she. And now, on this quiet evening a long way down the road from that shelf, with a sleeping child by the fire and a blue piece of glass in her fist, and a strand of human hair worked into a captain's cord, Veka turned her great head and set her brow against his, and said the thing she had been saving for 30 years. "You told me to stay until the storm passed," she said. "I did. It passed a long time ago." Her thumb found the join in the leather at her belt. "I am still here. 400 years of iron had taught the northern clans how to survive. It took one half-broken lamp-keeper, a warm copper pan, a burnt pot of barley, and a mended cord to teach them why surviving had never, on its own, been enough. Far out past the last of the northern water, on a rock rather smaller than Cordrek, a man who had been struck from every cord in the fleet sat in his doorway and watched the light of a ship go by, and did not wave, and had not waved in 19 years. The fleet still came once a year. They still left the stores. Nobody had ever been able to tell him why. Thank you for staying with Tomas and Veka all the way to the end. If this story moved you, subscribe to Orc Story and turn on the bell so the next one reaches you the moment it lands. Leave a like. It genuinely helps these tales find more hearts like yours. And tell us in the comments, if you were Tomas, standing in that doorway with nothing but £11 a year and an empty chair, would you have said stay? We read everyone. And until the next tale of two worlds, take care of each other, and we will see you on the water.